I'd like to call the Governance Committee to order, and the first order of business is roll call, please.
Henry Jones.
Here.
Dana Hollinger.
Excused.
Rob Beckner.
Morning.
Lisa Middleton.
Present.
Jason Perez.
Here.
Mona Pasquil-Rogers.
Here.
Ramon Rubalcava.
Here.
Good. And I'd also like to acknowledge that Ms. Paquin, Ms. Ortega, Mr. Miller, Ms. Brown, Ms. Taylor, and Mr. Rufino are also in attendance at the Governance Committee meeting. The next action on the agenda is the election of the Board Governance Vice Chair, and this is because Ms. Hollinger, who was the Vice Chair of this committee, has tendered her resignation effective June 30th, and so therefore we are going to elect a Vice Chair of this committee that would be effective July 1st. So with that, I call on Mr. Fechner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to place in nomination the name of Mona Pasquil-Rogers for the Vice Chair of this committee starting July 1st.
Okay.
Second.
Are there any further nominations? Are there any further nominations? Are there any further nominations? Seeing no further nominations, we have a motion to elect Ms. Pasquale by acclamation. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. Congratulations, Ms. Pasquale. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the executive report. Mr. Jacobs. Time agenda, I'm sorry. Need a motion on the time agenda?
Move approval.
Moved by Mr. Fechner. Second by Ms. Middleton. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the item passes. The next item is the executive report. Mr. Jacobs.
Yes, good morning, Chairman Jones and board members. I have no executive report beyond the agenda today, and so I think we can just get right into the agenda.
Okay, thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the action consent item. Do we have a motion for the action consent items? Moved by Mr. Perez, second by Mr. Fechner. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The item passes. The next item is information consent item, and no request to review anything there, so we will move to information agenda items. Update on board self-evaluation work streams.
Thank you, and good morning. Anne Simpson, from CalPERS team member. This morning, as promised in January, we're going to give you an update on how the various board work streams have been progressing with the different activities that were agreed coming out of the board's self-evaluation, which the National Association of Corporate Directors facilitated last year. Let me move to the first slide. So this graphic is intended really to show how the different work streams are connected. Work streams 1, 2, 3, 4. Many of you are involved leading these and have been extremely busy and working hard in recent months to make progress. But what we're showing with work stream 5 is the platform, and that's the Insight tool. This is a new cloud-based portal which the board will have access to, and all of the materials that are being developed by the different work streams will live on that portal, along with agenda items and other information that the board needs. So we think this is going to be a terrific resource. So let me turn to the first work stream. This is work stream 1, and it's led by Ms. Taylor and Ms. Mona Pasquil-Rogers. And this goal was identified through the self-evaluation. This was you as the board identifying something that's going to help you be more effective and give you better tools and skills for improving the performance of the CalPERS board. And the goal, as we have it here, is to establish a richer and ongoing board orientation and education program. In other words, not just for when board members arrive, but to make sure that there's a continuing education program so that you have the skills and insight that you need for the board and the committees. So this is the plan that's been developed. The first is that we're planning to develop a timeline and a matrix by each committee. And on that committee, obviously the skills and knowledge that you need for each committee are quite different. But what we're going to do is be able to map those skills and experience by committee, and out of that, build an education program, a curriculum. The other thing we're planning with the timeline is to make sure that we're getting the orientation, or onboarding as it's sometimes called, get the orientation developed and delivered for board members within set time periods. So we're thinking, what is it board members need to know, be familiar with before the first board meeting? What do new board members need in the first 90 days? And then what's needed annually? And the example that we have here is what we think an enhanced orientation program would include. Not just the introduction to CalPERS, but also ensuring that you have all the information you need as new board members to understand the compliance and the required reporting. The CalPERS is quite a complicated institution. There's a lot to take on board there. Also, to give an overview of board governance and policies, ensure fiduciary training is given, and the famous Roberts Rules of Order, which were developed by military gentlemen in the 19th century, but still give good advice on how meetings can be conducted in a respectful and in an efficient way. And CalPERS has traditionally incorporated Roberts Rules of Order into its own policies. The other thing that came through in the work stream was the idea that it might be useful when a new board member comes in to team them up with an experienced board member. I think we all know this is a buddy system, but at the beginning, when you need to find your way around and understand what's going on in this complicated institution, it might be helpful to have somebody who's there to help you get settled in. I've mentioned the matrix, so let's then go to the example from the investment committee. So this work has already begun, as you know. We've teamed up with the CFA and CII to start building out the curriculum for the investment committee. And what we're thinking is, what's the body of knowledge that all board members sitting on that committee need to have in order to prepare for big decisions that need to be made further down the road? So we started with risk return and benchmarks in May. We've just this week had an overview of global fixed income. Next, we'll be moving to global equity in our August board meeting, and then in the autumn moving to the private markets so that we can look at real assets and private equity to give all board members a really thorough grounding on the key issues in those asset classes. And then we want to wrap it up with a session on asset allocation and liability modeling, just to tie all the asset class training together. So that's just an example, and what we'll be doing is moving through each of the committees with the same approach, identifying what the key bodies of knowledge are and the skills that are needed, and building out a curriculum with outside independent expertise to help the board gain and improve the skills that they bring to bear when they're on committees. The second work stream reflects another issue which surfaced through the board's self-evaluation, and that's a need to clarify roles and responsibilities in the complex structure that CalPERS has. So the goals of this work stream, which is led by our president, Henry Jones, and Betty Yee, the goals are to revisit the committee structure and composition and check that these are all at their highest and best use, review the role of board consultants, and also explore equitable allocation of remunerated board time, recognizing that board members have very different arrangements that allow them time to fulfill their responsibilities. So in terms of what we'll plan to deliver is looking at the documents that set out roles and responsibilities. Obviously, at the highest level, this is the California Constitution. That's what gave birth to CalPERS many years ago during the Depression in the United States. But also then look at the board's delegations to committees. These are the documents which give authority to the committees to act on behalf of the board. And then the committee delegations themselves, which set out what the role of each of the committees is. And out of that, gain a better understanding of, out of the 6 committees, many are connected, some have shared responsibility for big topics like asset liability modelling, but make sure we've got this all set out with real clarity so that everybody can understand the board and the committees and how they interact. We're also going to make sure in the documents that there's clarity around the delegation to the Chief Executive Officer. This is a normal part of a board delegation, as the board's job is to oversee and from time to time to act and to approve, but the execution is through the Chief Executive. So the delegation to the Chief Executive, is important that we have clarity for all board members on what that covers. And finally, touching again on the issue of the role of the consultants, ensuring that the scope of work and the contracts are well understood, and the role of consultants in supporting the board, we have clarity there too. The other issue which this work stream is looking at is ensuring that the board agenda items themselves better reflect the roles that are set out in the delegations. So for the oversight role, the question being, what's the flow of information the board needs to prepare itself for decisions, but also to exercise oversight? And we'll continue to use the annual agenda items to clarify the roles and responsibilities, making sure CalPERS is checking in on best practice data and also responding to the board's own preferences. So that's work stream number 2. So work stream number 3 flows very nicely on from the other 2 work streams. And the goals here are to review the calendar and the format for board meetings, look at whether it's possible to streamline the format and the content of agenda item materials. And some of that work is already underway. We're very grateful to Dana Hollinger, who was a co-lead on this committee until recently, and a warm welcome to Ms. Middleton for stepping in to join David Miller. This is a very important area of work. So the deliverables, as they get called in life. The first thing this work stream will be delivering is a calendar looking forward for the next 12 to 18 months of the key decisions, but also the preparatory discussions that all the board committees need to undertake. And making sure we've got these very clearly categorized for action, for information, and also, bearing in mind our first work stream, from the board, education, because the role of the board encompasses all 3. Linking to another work stream, making sure that all of this information for these 3 categories of information, action, and education, having all of this available on the portal. And we'll say a little bit more about that in a moment when we come to work stream 5. The other important issue for this work stream is looking at what I think of as the lunar cycle for CalPERS board meetings. The board and some of the committees meet every 30 days, apart from in October when there's the Education Forum, which is another very big area of work because it's stakeholder outreach, which again is an extremely important function of the board. So what this workstream will be doing is looking to benchmark meeting frequency based on industry best practices. See how other large public pension funds arrange their meeting calendar and see what we can learn about making the CalPERS board more effective. This workstream will also be looking to refine the agenda item supporting documentation. And the idea here is that we could have a new template for board agenda items, which really gets to the heart of the matter for the board more quickly by giving you an executive summary, but also background on prior decisions and the alternatives that were looked at, and the pros and the cons. And there's been a lot of very useful feedback on what would give you the speed read, the at-a-glance view on an issue, whilst allowing you to dig deep on all the background material and prior decisions that get us to the point of the summary. Workstream 4 is around the development of a code of conduct for CalPERS board members. And this, again, was an issue which came through from many then board members who participated in the self-evaluation, which is a recognition that you can write things down on paper, but at the end of the day, the board's functioning is dynamic. It's about people and how people interact with each other. And a code of conduct is intended to help set expectations for how that behavior, how that conduct is undertaken by different board members. Rob Fechner and Jason Perez are the two board members leading this important work. Their plan is to provide a draft code of conduct for the board, which will give guidelines, or if you like, expectations, on how board members interact with each other, also with team members, with stakeholders and the wider public. And the idea is that it serves as a statement of CalPERS' organizational values, commitment, and reflects the CalPERS brand. So the work is underway, as many of you know, and the code in its draft form, when you review it, may include the following topics, which are of great importance to any governing body. The duty of loyalty and care, which is part of board members' fiduciary duty set out in the California Constitution. Addressing potential conflicts of interest or even the appearance of conflicts of interest. The process for decision making, that is to be able to come to a decision and then move on with collegial support for the decision rather than revisiting. Confidentiality, which is of course is the utmost importance for CalPERS members to protect not just their information but also decisions before they come into the public domain that can affect the performance of the fund and our ability to meet our investment goals. And finally, accountability. How will the board hold itself, its members, how will board members hold each other accountable for demonstrating not just the letter but the spirit of the code of best practice? That would be an important area for this work stream. So the next steps here are Mr. Perez, Mr. Jones in the lead will be to seek discussion and feedback and eventually approval for the draft code for the board members, and also to establish a process for annual attestation by board members. Now, attestation is a fancy word for saying I understand and I agree and yes. And that's important probably at the beginning with onboarding so that new board members understand expectations around the code. But having an annual attestation will give board members an opportunity to refresh their commitment to CalPERS Code of Conduct. And finally, as we showed in the first slide, the platform for all of this good work is going to be the Insight tool, which Tim Taylor and Doug showed you first at the January board offsite. Well, a lot more work is underway, and Tim and his team are really waiting for the conclusions from each of the other work streams so that they can start loading on the material onto the portal. So the goal here is to enable board members to rapidly gain insights into key decisions and policy decisions required by the board, and also to carry out the prudent oversight of the execution of those decisions. And we've had 3 board members in 2 beta streams test driving, if you like, an early version, and giving a lot of very useful feedback. There's Ms. Brown, Mr. Rubalcava, and Ms. Ma. The portal is envisaged that it will look back to give an archive of materials. Currently, Tim has 2 years of all board items, all board decisions. And the goal is to expand that to 3 years. And this will be word searchable. So when we say a comprehensive search tool, this will be, like a CalPERS version of Google. You'll be able to put in a key term and pull up the agenda items and the attachments on that topic that go back over that 3-year period. We're also, by popular request, going to include a glossary of terms and acronyms. My favorite finding during this process is that we use the same acronym for more than one thing, depending on which committee is calling a PPO, could be a prudent person opinion, or in the health world, it's a health provider. So our alphabet soup, the CalPERS alphabet soup, we're going to be able to really help by having these acronyms dealt with there. We'll have the 12 to 18-month meeting calendar, which one of the other work streams is working on, but we're also going to make sure it's your place for all the resources you need as board members. So the policies, the delegations, the code of conduct, and of course all the prior agenda and materials and research that's gone into recommendations and decisions that the board has made. Finally, we think this new platform, this Insight tool, is going to be a marvelous place to have the curriculum and onboarding materials. So you can envisage, for example, with Jeff Bailey, who's just been in to talk about risk and return and global fixed income, being able to have the video of his presentation, the slides, the homework, if you like, the background reading that was provided to the board, and have it all there. So that when board members are coming to make a decision, it'd be, what do we really mean by standard deviation? It's not a normal term you come across in your daily life, but be able to go back into the education section of the portal and refresh your thinking on that particular topic. I think that's it. I'd be very happy to answer any questions. Many thanks to all the board members who've been working so hard on all of this. It's a tremendous amount of activity, and I think it's a great credit to CalPERS that the board itself has been willing to pick up this wide range of important topics.
Okay. And thank you, Ms. Simpson. I want to thank you for your efforts in pulling all this together, and thank the board members who have been participating very actively in getting us to this point, and we look forward to the next update. Ms. Brown.
Thank you. And I do appreciate staff's work on this and the board, but my colleagues on the board's work on this. And I just have a couple of questions or comments. I want to go to slide 4. This is a workstream board curriculum. I think onboarding is essential for new board members. I just think, we got some fiduciary training and a little introduction, but really I think this is critical. Also, I'm glad to see Robert's Rules of Order on here. When I joined, I asked for a copy. We were given like several pages. It was like an old Xerox from the 90s. And I asked for a copy and it was denied. So I'm hoping that all board members will get copies of the Robert's Rules of Order, because I think it's important to know how we make a motion or how we call for a, if we have we want a dissent. So I think it's very helpful, because I've made some silly little mistakes as we move forward. I'd like to go to now page 9, which is the meeting materials. I think it's great that we're going to streamline the format and content, but I hope that in streamline doesn't eliminate documentation or information that could hinder the board's ability to fulfill its fiduciary duties. And I saw later on slide 12 you talked about that, but I want to make sure that, I get in a long time ago when it was all paper and binders, that's a lot, but it's electronic now and it's very easy to include the attachments. I think I had a question on an investment committee where there was documents or opinions by consultants referenced, but they weren't included. And it turns out not even our chair had them. So again, I want to make sure that we don't eliminate attachments for those of us who have nothing better to do than to read the research.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just to give the board some sense of where we are with meeting materials at the moment.
Ms. Simpson, before you go,
Oh, I'm so
proceed,
sorry.
I would just like to mention, Ms. Brown, you can have a copy of Robert's Rules, and I'll see that you get a copy.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jones. I just wanted to give a data point to give the board a sense of where we are at the moment with meeting materials. I asked Tim Taylor to kindly look back over the last 2 years for the investment committee, which meets every month at the moment. He found there were 511 items of information prepared by staff over that 2-year period. So obviously this is an enormous flow of information to you, but if we were to calculate the time and effort and opportunity cost of staff spending all that time on 511 items, to Ms. Brown's point, a more efficient way is to have this available on the portal so that board members can take their queries directly into the material. I think it's going to be more efficient for staff and hopefully more efficient for you too.
Great. Just a few more comments. Page 11, where you talk about refining agenda items, supporting material, including background on prior decisions. That is also helpful not only for new board members, but for staff members. I know there was a question with the CFO eliminating as sort of a practice or a policy, and Mr. Jones very clearly pointed out, no, the board had agreed that we're going to do it this way. So, and he didn't know that, and it would have been helpful to know that with the background materials. So that's great, because you're relying on basically people's knowledge as opposed to what's in the background. And the board, you know, we have 8 newer board members now, so it's a little different. And then I want to go on to the code of conduct, and my comments on those are just general, which is I hope whatever that you come up with as a draft, that in no way does it hinder the board's ability to fulfill their fiduciary duties, to stifle dissent, or basically, and I know you wouldn't cancel anybody's First Amendment rights to freedom of speech, and I just want to point that out. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Taylor.
Yes, thank you. And thank you very much for all the support and work with us to work on these work streams. And I really appreciate it. And I also am appreciative of the process and how it started and getting our opinion, because I think all of us being able to do the board self-evaluation enabled us to go this direction. So I'm really happy that we've done this. I had a couple of questions on the Insight tool. I cannot remember, and I know you guys told me, so I apologize ahead of time. Was this replacing Diligent? Do we remember?
Do you want to answer
Yeah, go ahead.
It would have the ability to replace the Diligent service that you're using today. That would
Okay.
be the intent, but obviously it would have to be as comprehensive as what you currently have available to you. What we are building out is something that we think would be more intuitive, contain more information. And for example, one of the pieces of feedback that I get from several of you is how difficult it is to find prior agenda
is.
materials.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the way that you have to search is by committee and by date. And so this Insight tool is intended to help create a better search feature as well.
Okay, awesome. That I thought I remembered that, but I wasn't sure. So I wanted to make sure that we were, and maybe as we implement the Insight tool, we have, our pilot period and keep Diligent until the pilot period's over and we're
Right.
sure it works. And
Right.
Yeah, we would give you the opportunity to run dual services for a period of time.
Right.
And then eventually, once it's fully tested by the board, we would make this, other than closed session material, we'd put this out on the website and the stakeholders would be able to have the same capability.
Oh, good. Awesome. Thank you. And then I was thinking about, as we reading the insight tool and what we can go back and look at and the comprehensive. So sometimes I read all the white papers that you guys give us or whatever, and sometimes I don't because I don't have time. But afterwards, I would like to be able to, and sometimes you've archived the books, and then I have a hard time finding it. But I think, I don't know, but I was thinking if we had like a click-through, so it doesn't have to be part of the board materials, but it can be a link that you can click on that says, here's the background reading material, and then if you don't want to read it, you don't have to click on it. I don't know how that's going to work, but I was thinking that might be helpful as well. And those were my 2 things for insight. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Middleton.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to congratulate Ms. Simpson and the board for this effort. This it looks incredibly professional and very necessary. So my compliments, and I look forward to working with Mr. Miller on the calendar and those issues. One simple question. In Robert's Rules of Order, did we consider adoption of the Rosenberg Rules of Order? And
Mr. Jacobs.
I'm not familiar with those, so the answer would be no.
all right. Rosenberg Rules of Order are actually the standard that League of California Cities is now training new municipal appointees and elected officials. Rosenberg is 10 pages long. Roberts is voluminous. Rosenberg is actually a very efficient way of reviewing rules, and it is a 20th century product, and I can get a copy for you, and I very much recommend at least reviewing Rosenberg. For most of us, it will be much easier to follow. If you are familiar with Roberts, I think you'll find Rosenberg very easy to use.
Great idea.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Perez.
Thank you. And the only question or point that I wanted to bring up is when you were describing the code of conduct, one of the last things you said was the collegial way in which we interact. Of course, we should all act like ladies and gentlemen, but there's a specifically speaking about, because you mentioned not bringing it up or not revisiting it, and I'm assuming you're talking about a decision that the board makes. And from what I learned in reviewing all the paperwork that you guys provided, I think it's, and Matt, you can, Mr. Jacobs, Ms. Simpson, sorry, you can probably point it out if I'm incorrect, or maybe we can get something from Dunning. I think it's our duty to, and not duty in the sense of, and not informal obligation. I think it's a formal duty for us to continue to advocate for what we believe is our fiduciary duty. So to the extent that we may disagree, again, specifically for an item that we discussed and voted upon, not for confidentiality or anything like that, specifically for that one little piece, I think it's our duty to continue to revisit it. Does that sound accurate, Mr. Jacobs?
I think it sounds accurate, but I think the question is how you do that, because it would be disruptive to the proceedings if, for example, you wanted to bring up a particular item every session. So I think there are, I don't know about Rosenberg's, I look forward to looking at those, but Roberts, there are specific procedures about when you can bring up an issue that has already been decided, which side of the equation or which side of the debate you had to be on to do that. And while I agree that you don't just give up your ability or the importance of commenting on something if you happen to be on the wrong side of the decision, the question really becomes how you continue to advocate for it. And to ensure that it doesn't become disruptive to the efficient operation of the board or agency.
Thank you. And then, excuse me, the only other thing I had that, when I was thinking about the question that I asked, is there any way we can get a letter from Ms. Nunning, our fiduciary counsel, to say that our board of conduct falls within, is acceptable practice?
This is the code of conduct that you are working on?
Yes, sir.
If that would be the direction of the committee, I think that would be doable.
Thank you.
And we'll also have Carrie Dominguez, who you had all worked with on the self-assessment. She'll be joining us at the offsite in July, and she will give you her input on the code of conduct and how that compares to what she's seen in the industry and what best practices would be. So you can ask her, any question around best practices, but I think we could also get Ashley Dunning, your fiduciary attorney, or our fiduciary attorney, to weigh in on it.
Thank you.
So let that be the direction of the chair to do that.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Ms.
That would be, just to clarify, that would be upon the development or adoption of a code of conduct?
Yes.
Good.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Miller.
Yeah, thank you. I just first want to thank Ms. Middleton for stepping up, and this is an important work stream, and we've still got quite a bit to do, so thanks for stepping up to that challenge. We'll certainly miss Dana's contributions because she's really been a champ on this work stream. And the other thing I think I just want to acknowledge, beyond the acknowledgments of staff's work on this, is a big part of the staff's work on this has been helping us on each individual work stream to see the bigger picture and how they relate to the other work streams and the work of us as a board, but also of staff, and also of our ability to communicate and have things work in a way that's beneficial to the stakeholders, especially those that really are paying attention. The folks who I see here engage with us at every board meeting. And it's important for them to be able to have a good understanding of what we're doing, how we're making decisions. And I think the relationship of the work streams to each other and our ability to see, for example, the opportunity I had to take a look at the Insight tool and have a walkthrough of it to see how the work we're doing in our work stream relates to the work that's going on in those work streams is also a real important part of what staff's been doing in supporting these work streams. And I think ultimately it will benefit everybody, because when I see the volume of material I get, and I just imagine the challenge for someone who is an engaged member in our audience with one of our stakeholder associations, or just an individual interested member, how daunting it is for them. So I really appreciate that staff recognizes all those aspects of it that just the two individual board members on each work stream can't really cover without that kind of assistance and kind of facilitation and the glue that holds the whole thing together and puts it in a holistic framework. So thanks for that.
So that says keep up the good work. Okay, no further questions.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Simpson. Okay, we will move now to item 7B. That's reporting of board members' overseas travel.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Jones. There is an existing provision in Robert's Rules of Order which have been incorporated into the document which Ms. Brown mentioned earlier, which actually already covers this as a request, that when board members travel, there should be a report back on the activities and some comment on what was learned and what can be shared. So I appreciate that Ms. Brown doesn't at the moment have a copy of this document, and Mr. Jones, you've said this would be provided. So perhaps Ms. Brown would be able to take a look at the existing policy and make sure it ticks all the boxes. But as we look at the next version of Robert's Rules of Order, it might be that we can put that into more clear and plain language. I appreciate it's quite an old document, but it's a firm foundation on which we can build new.
This item came from one of our stakeholders, and I think that the focus was to be what was learned for the general public was the nature of the question. So if you could look at how we could come to grips of reporting out through the governance committee, that I think that's where the focus of the question was.
Mr. Jones, what we would be looking for is committee direction that you would want us to place on future agenda items, a report out from any board member who traveled. And we say overseas here, but I think the stakeholder input was that any travel that's done by the board, that there would be a report out so people could understand the purpose of the travel, what was learned in the travel, and how does it apply to CalPERS and the role of the board.
I think give some thought about what kind of travel, because I know I go out 15 times a month to stakeholder retiree chapters, and I know Ms. Brown goes out 15 times perhaps, and I know that others go out on a regular basis. I don't know if that's really what we want to be reporting on.
I think they were more educational events, conferences, in particular conferences, and in particular overseas conferences.
Okay, good. Okay, we'll follow up on that. Okay, thank you. We do have a couple of requests to speak on this item. Mr. Fontaine and Mr. Burns. Would you please come up? You will have 3 minutes, so you come. Oh, you did? Before you start speaking, Mr. Burns, come on up. But we have another comment from board members first. Sorry. Good.
Great. I'm hoping that Ms. Simpson can look at maybe what other agencies do in terms of travel policy or reporting out. I don't expect a verbal report here, but maybe something even that's just automatically on our travel claim when we do it, that basically says, you know, what we learned. Like I just spent a week at Wharton. You know, I know that you probably don't want to know what not to order at Hometown Buffet, but I could tell you that as well. But I think more importantly, what we learned, and then any materials that we might want to attach and share, then other board members could look at it, especially with the new insight tool. And just to be clear, Mr. Jones, you did not deny me the copy of Robert's Rules of Order, but I did try to go and buy my own copy, and there's like 40 versions of it. I'm really looking forward to a 10-page version. I hope our legal counsel will tell us that that'll work.
There is no 10-page version of Robert's Rules.
Of Rosenberg.
Oh, Rosenberg,
yeah.
right.
Yeah, but no, I had looked, and there's all these different versions. I had no idea which one to buy on Amazon. So if we just know what version we're using here, that'd be great as well. But maybe we'll just use the 10-page thing, and that'd be great. So, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Ms. Taylor.
Just, and I'm sorry, guys, I'll be done quick. I just wanted to let everybody know that we do fill out for our own, because we have to have education credits. So we do fill out education credits when we come back from each travel. I was thinking that the person that made the request kind of wanted a public overview. So. Yeah. That would, and then we could, have the video of that available on the Insight tool. But I mean, I think it's important when you go to Insight or when I go to PRI or whatever that we let the public know what we learned and do a quick overview statement. So.
Okay, who's first?
Thank you, Chairman Jones and members of the committee. Tim Behrens, President of the California State Retirees, one of the requesters of this item, and supporting. I think it can be as small as your attendance at one of our chapter meetings and a stakeholder ask a good question, and there should be some way for you to be able to share that information with your fellow board member at least, if nothing else, just a written report. All I've heard in the last 7 years, where you went and how long you were gone, and it's approved. So that doesn't tell me anything about the complexities of the, let's start with Wall Street. I know that several members in the past have gone to Wall Street and met and talked about investments. I think that's a valuable piece of information for me as a stakeholder to know what's going on with CalPERS board and Wall Street. I also think it's important to know when you go overseas how that impacts the investment of CalPERS and the complexities of what's going on overseas versus what's going on in the United States, and how the two work together and how it affects the stakeholders and the bottom line, how it affects the unfunded liabilities of CalPERS. So I think it's a really good idea. I don't have any dog in the fight in how you do it and what the end product looks like, but I just hope you will start reporting it out in some fashion. Thank you.
Welcome.
Good morning, board members. I'm Jerry Fontaine, Chief Financial Officer for the California State Retirees. I can only mirror what President Behrens has said and what Ms. Frost has said. In previous conversations I've had with Henry, he has spoke of his personal travels on behalf of CalPERS, and I found it very interesting as to the scope of what goes on in foreign countries with foreign investments, and it gave me a better understanding of the need for the board to continue doing this. So having heard what is behind this travel and the importance of it, I think it's very important for the board to continue to let the stakeholders know the details of what's going on, what you're doing on behalf of the stakeholders. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Okay. Okay, now we will move to item 7C, summary of committee direction. Mr. Jacobs.
Yes, I think I have two. One is to work with staff to get copies of Robert's rules to whichever board members would like them. I would note that on the version issue, there's really only one official version. Then there are multiple people who have edited them in different ways or provided commentary or the like. So we'll take a look and make sure that it's the best one. I've also got to take a look at the Rosenberg's rules, which a colleague of mine in the legal office just emailed me, which he could do because, as Ms. Middleton said, it's only 10 pages, and the couple of pages that I was able to read look very clean. So I look forward to looking at that. I will note that it is in the board governance policy that we follow Robert's rules. So it would just be, if this is something that we wanted to do, we would just need to bring it to the board and make that change. But
Okay,
they look interesting.
Okay, thank you, Matt.
You're welcome.
Okay. And what's the second one?
That was the second one,
Okay.
look at Rosenberg's rules.
Okay, in addition to the Robert's rules. Okay. Let me see, I thought I asked something else. No, it was Jason, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Upon the adoption or the close adoption or getting close to the adoption of a rule, of a code of conduct, we would ask Ms. Dunning to take a look at that and give us her commentary and her views that conforms with fiduciary duty.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. Well, with that, then I have no request from the public to speak on as a public comment, so this meeting is adjourned. And the Board of Administration will begin, let's say, at 9:15? I mean, 10:15? Is that enough time? Okay.